June 8th, 1944. Off the coast of Normandy, France. Wind howls over the English Channel. Waves slam against steel hulls. In the half-light of dawn, Lieutenant Commander Alan Beckett, Royal Engineers, braces himself on the deck of a landing craft as rain needles his face. Around him, a convoy of ships stretches to the horizon. Freighters, barges, tugboats, and strange floating shapes chained together like some mechanical serpent rising from the sea. Beckett squints toward the battered shoreline. The beaches of Normandy, only 2 days after D-Day, are chaos. Smoke from artillery and burning vehicles mixes with low fog, turning the horizon into a smouldering blur. Wrecked landing craft still litter the shallows, and somewhere beyond the dunes, American and British infantry fight to secure the hedgerows. Christ, a sailor mutters beside him. How do they expect us to build anything in that? Beckett doesn't answer. He grips the rail, eyes locked on the grey sea where waves toss massive concrete blocks the size of small buildings. They're called Phoenix caissons, hollow, watertight giants that have been towed across the channel from England. In a few hours, they'll be sunk in precise rows to form a breakwater. Around them, other vessels carry spud pierheads, whale-floating roadways, and 1,000 components of what will become the Mulberry Harbour, a floating port that must be built faster than anything in human history. Over the radio, static crackles with a coded message from headquarters. Supplies behind schedule, Omaha at critical, gold under strain. Priority 1, get the harbour working. Beckett exhales slowly. This was his design, his gamble, a plan so audacious that even Churchill had called it impossibly brilliant. They were to create a harbour out of thin air, where no port existed, under fire, on open sea. Far to the east, on a cliff near Caen, German Oberst Hans Behrens peers through his binoculars at the same horizon. Behind him, the wreck of a Panzer IV smoulders beside a hedgerow. His field telephone buzzes. It's Lieutenant Kruger from Coastal Artillery Command. Behrens, the enemy. They are building something on the water. Building? What do you mean? More ships? No, Herr Oberst, they are connecting them, like bridges, like... The line cuts in static. Behrens lowers the binoculars. Through the mist, he can see it now. Distant silhouettes of cranes, pontoon platforms, and half-submerged concrete blocks slowly forming a line toward the shore. It makes no sense. No fleet could just build a harbour. Not here, not in days. And yet, that's exactly what the Allies were doing. By nightfall, floodlights glowed over the channel. Engineers worked knee-deep in surf, welding sections of floating roadways while waves pounded their backs. Tanks rolled down these makeshift piers, followed by trucks laden with fuel and ammunition. In the darkness, the roar of the sea blended with the rhythmic clang of steel. Beckett climbed onto a spud pierhead as it rose with the tide. He stared down at the floating structure below, 33 jetties already in place, more arriving every hour. A gust of wind carried the smell of oil and cordite. "Keep her steady," he shouted to his men. "This harbour's got to live through hell before morning." And somewhere on the cliffs above, Oberst Behrens whispered to his adjutant, disbelief etched in every word. "They're turning the sea into land." June 12th, 1944. Arromanches, Normandy. The sea has calmed, but the air hums with motion. Engines rumble across the horizon as a procession of vessels. Liberty ships, tank landing craft, and tugs queue at the mouth of the newly finished Mulberry Bee. Overhead, the drone of Allied aircraft circles endlessly, scanning for Luftwaffe strafers. On shore, the once silent fishing village of Arromanches is now the beating industrial heart of the Allied invasion. Cranes creak as they lift crates, stamped US Army ordnance. Bulldozers roar. Men shout orders over the thunder of waves and machinery. And stretching out from the beach, like a steel spine reaching into the sea, the floating harbour rises and falls with the tide. An impossible city of metal and motion. Captain Frank Lawson of the US Army Corps of Engineers wipes grease from his hands and stares in awe at the completed causeway. A convoy of trucks rattles past him, rolling across the undulating floating roadway. They carry ammunition, rations, barrels of fuel. the lifeblood of Operation Overlord. Back home, he murmurs, they'd call this a miracle. Beside him, a British sapper laughs through a mouthful of cigarette smoke. Miracle? Nah, mate. Just a bit of bloody good engineering. Beyond the piers, the Phoenix caissons, massive concrete fortresses, stand like a line of drowned castles. Each one weighs over 6,000 tons, sunk precisely to form a breakwater that tames the channel's fury. The engineering is precise down to inches, though built amid chaos. Men welding through storms, ships lashed by wind, and bombs falling close enough to send seawater crashing over the decks. By midday, sunlight breaks through the clouds. The scene looks almost serene. Rows of DUKW amphibious trucks glide across the surf, bringing supplies straight from ships to shore. The Mulberry Harbour is alive, breathing, moving, flexing with the waves, and through it flows the future of the Allied war effort. Meanwhile, just 30 kilometres inland, German engineers huddle over reconnaissance photos delivered by a Fiesler Storch aircraft. Black and white prints spread across a wooden table show what looks like a port where none should exist. Major Dieter Weiss, a structural engineer turned officer, adjusts his glasses. This can't be permanent, he says. No port can stand without piles or rock foundation. A staff sergeant shakes his head. The photos show vehicles moving, hundreds of them, fuel trucks, tanks, supply lorries. It is working. Weiss leans closer, tracing a finger along the faint line of floating pontoons that snake from the beach to the open sea. This, he mutters, this is industry at war. They're not just fighting with men and bullets anymore. They're fighting with factories. Outside, the rumble of distant artillery echoes. The German front is breaking, slowly but surely. What they thought would cripple the invasion, the lack of a port, has become its strongest advantage. Back in Arromanches, as the sun sets in brilliant silver over the channel, Beckett and Lawson stand shoulder to shoulder on the floating roadway. The tide swells beneath their boots, rocking the steel plates. You know, Beckett says, voice low, the Germans will be looking at this right now, wondering how the devil we did it. Lawson chuckles. Let them wonder. A wave slaps against the pier, throwing salt spray into the air. Behind them, columns of trucks move endlessly from sea to shore. On the horizon, another Liberty ship eases toward the harbour, the next link in an unbroken chain of supply that will feed the liberation of Europe. Under the fading light, the harbour glows faintly, a living monument to human ingenuity. And somewhere beyond the smoke, in a German command post lit by a single lantern, Oberst Behrens stares at his latest report and murmurs, almost in awe, they've built a port out of the sea itself. June 20th, 1944. Normandy coast, dawn. A light mist rolls over the channel. The sea glints pale silver beneath a soft sunrise. But beneath that calm surface, the greatest logistical operation of the Second World War grinds forward. The Mulberry Harbour hums like a living machine. Cranes swing over floating piers. Winches groan. Landing craft nose up to steel ramps slick with seawater and oil. From the command deck of a transport ship, Major General John C.H. Lee, head of the U.S. Services of Supply, watches as another line of vehicles trundles down the floating causeway. He takes a drag from his pipe and exhales slowly. That's 20,000 tons today, his aide calls out over the wind. Lee smiles faintly, and we're only just beginning. Below, hundreds of soldiers move with practiced rhythm, like ants on an anthill of iron. British engineers in overalls guide the arrival of a Phoenix caisson being manoeuvred into place by tugboats. A loudspeaker blares. Mind the cables! Keep the line taut! The harbour flexes as waves roll beneath it, but holds steady. On the beaches, rows of Sherman tanks and jeeps wait beside stacked crates of ammunition and fuel. The once barren coastline now looks like a small city. Tents flap in the wind. Columns of smoke rise from field kitchens. The smell of diesel and salt hangs in the air. Every sound, the clang of metal, the bark of an officer, the whine of an engine, echoes against the cliffs above. Far offshore, the German artillery that once harassed the invasion fleet has fallen silent. Allied air superiority and the speed of supply has crushed any hope of counterattack. But inside the German command bunker at St. Lo, disbelief still lingers. Oberst Wilhelm Behrens sits in front of a newly arrived reconnaissance film, projected against a concrete wall. Grainy footage shows trucks driving off ships directly onto land. He pauses the film, his cigarette trembling slightly in his hand. "This is not possible," he mutters. "The seafloor would never hold." Captain Franz Keller, a young officer trained in civil engineering, replies quietly, "They're not building on the seabed, sir. They're floating it." Behrens turns, incredulous. "Floating?" "Yes, steel pontoons, modular sections, concrete barriers. It's ingenious." Keller hesitates. "Frankly, sir, I don't think we can destroy it. Even if we hit one section, they'll replace it by tomorrow." Behrens stares back at the flickering image on the wall. Liberty ships anchored offshore, endless convoys moving inland, the enemy's port, conjured out of the surf. "We thought we were fighting soldiers," he says grimly. "We're fighting an entire civilization." Back in the harbour, a storm begins to brew. Winds whip across the channel, waves smashing against the floating causeways. Engineers rush to secure the pontoons as cables strain and moan under the pressure. Sergeant Tom Ridley, soaked to the bone, shouts over the wind, "If this goes, the whole line's done." Captain Beckett slams a wrench onto a tension bolt. "Then it won't go," he yells. The men lash extra cables, tighten bolts, and fight the storm through the night. Rain pelts their faces, salt stinging their eyes. The sea roars like cannon fire. By morning, the storm breaks. The sky clears to a pale grey. Exhausted engineers look out over the harbour, battered but still standing. One of the pontoons has drifted, but the causeway holds. Trucks continue to roll. The invasion doesn't pause for weather or war. Standing ankle-deep in water, Beckett laughs wearily. "Tell Berlin," he says to no one in particular, "this coffin floats." The Mulberry Harbour would go on to move over 2.5 million men, 500,000 vehicles, and 4 million tons of supplies before the end of 1944. It wasn't just a structure, it was a statement, a triumph of willpower and ingenuity over nature itself. And for the German engineers who studied its wreckage months later, one truth became painfully clear. The war was no longer decided by who built the biggest guns, but by who could build the fastest, the smartest, and the most. The Allies had turned the tide, not just with steel and fire,